Welcome back to the Rex Reviews podcast. It's Lou McCoy, TiborasaurusRex, and Casey Day joining you for another portion of our fantastic radio extravaganza. Rex and I have been stranded up here in the Arctic Circle for a while. Casey just got back from Fairfax. It was pretty nice down there, wasn't it?
Yeah, the weather was pretty decent to me, but I'm really glad to be back in the Arctic Circle here.
I guess it's all relative at the end of the day. And for the next portion of the show here, we're going to discuss something a little bit bigger than long-range precision rifles. And it just kind of stems from a discussion you and I were having a couple weeks ago, Rex, about the nuclear arsenal in the United States and across the world and the state of the technology therein. And you see a lot of things on the news and in the media anymore about how the technology is outdated. Is that real? Is that something we should buy into? Is that something that we even need to be concerned about?
Well, it's something that we probably shouldn't know about if it was actually happening, because that's kind of like an important part of the strategic defense of the United States system is the state of our nuclear triad. You know, our missile systems, our bomber capabilities, and our submarine stuff should kind of be a classified deal. But sometimes people do, you will see it in the news where they talk about the aging nuclear arsenal, and it is an issue that Congress has to be aware of so that they can vote to fund it, to keep it maintained and all that stuff. But yeah, there's a lot of misconceptions when you talk about the technology being used in our nuclear triad today, because a lot of folks have made accusations that like the technology is outdated.
When you say outdated, you mean like nuclear weapons running on floppy disks? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, they actually do run on a lot of that 1950s and 1960s technology in terms of the launch systems. For example, our currently deployed LGM fleet of missiles in the Dakotas and in Montana, the Minuteman III missiles is one of our big ICBMs in the nuclear triad, the land-based. Some of the submarine-based stuff too. If you look at the technology in the encryption and the launch sequence and all that stuff and the targeting, it's all very old technology. It's like from the 50s and 60s. They use floppy disk technology. They use the old computers where you have the holes in the boards and you got to insert the program and mechanically into the computer, and it sorts it all out. And when you send messages, it's all encrypted on a typewriter. But it's very old technology. I mean, some of the stuff is antiques, and that's what's actually running our nuclear weapons. And that's something that shocks a lot of people, is it is very old technology.
But does it need updating? Does it need replacing? Or if it's not broke, should we not fix it?
Well, you know, that's a very good question. And there's a lot of people on the news especially who kind of, they get the smirk and they get very critical of the outdated technology and they think it needs to be brought into the 21st century. And I think that that's true in terms of, I mean, wiring does get embrittled. It goes bad. You do need to, like, rodents get in there and eat stuff. I mean, there's stuff that goes wrong mechanically on these systems. Corrosion, you know, the plastic coating on a lot of the cables. This stuff does go bad after time. But actually, there is a reason for the old technology being employed in these super important systems. And one of the main reasons is that when you consider nuclear weapons exchange in a nuclear war, modern technology is more susceptible to damage by electromagnetic pulse. And the old school technology from the 1950s and 60s is a lot more easy to harden to EMP than is like a iPhone generation technology with very intricate solid state electronics. That stuff cooks, it's done. There's no fixing it. You don't want to lose your launch sequences because it was in some state-of-the-art computer drive. They want that stuff memorized in a different way and something a lot more robust of a design. So that's one of the big reasons they did not update the missile systems yet. They did reach a technology that was very reliable, was the number one thing. They wanted absolute reliability. And the old tech actually had that covered pretty well. The problem is that a lot of those components aren't even being made anymore. So they do have to kind of manufacture those on the spot. And they do have certain contractors that redo some of that stuff. But by and large, there is a reason for the old technology. Another big reason people don't think of too is that with new technology, I mean, you don't want your nukes to have like Bluetooth capability and like you don't want all this smart technology. The more technology you have in a system, the less secure it becomes electronically speaking. You do not want any possibility of a nuke getting hacked, right? Because if it can be done, it will happen. And the reason the nukes have not yet been hacked and launched everywhere by some radical, crazy people across the earth who would really think that would be a fun thing to do is just launch them all, right, and see what happens. If that would be possible, they would have done it. But they haven't done it because they're not hooked into the internet. They're not hooked into that kind of wireless technology. It's all got to be point-to-point wiring. You got to have actual physical switches. All that stuff you talk about, the old mechanical computer components and stuff. You cannot hack a floppy disk computer where you got to pull out all the components and switch them and plug them into each other and then flip a big lever over so that you can get the proper things conveyed to where they need to go. So that's a huge reason is the security factor. Is these things are basically standalone units. The way they are communicated to through ultra secure, ultra low frequency waves in terms of submarine launches, and the frequencies they use to convey these launch codes are all verified by launch codes that are set up in a very different way. So there's no way this stuff can be hacked. And that's a very important thing to realize is sometimes the old school methods are a lot more secure than the new ones. For example, if I want to do like some mafia type stuff with you, Lou, someday, and if we're going to start like a mob or something, and I have to tell you some like stuff that I don't want people to find out, the way I could convey that to you is to write it down on a little tiny piece of paper and give it to Pete over there, and he'll bring it to you, Lou. Yeah, and then he brings you the paper, see? And then, Rex has a message for you. And they'll get you the thing secured. If I send it to you on a text message,
it's out there.
It's out there, and it could be hacked, right? If I even, but there are securing programs. Yeah, well, someone invented that, okay? And usually people have backdoors. Mm-hmm. It's complicated enough to where if you're smart enough, there's always a way around it. Well, there's encrypted. I talk to people who think they can encrypt stuff, and it's funny. You can't encrypt anything that's like, if it's hooked onto the internet, dude, it's pretty much out there in cyberspace. All that stuff can be grabbed straight out of the air. So important stuff cannot be attached to the grid system. That's why nukes are off the grid. They have their own grid for that. And anything that's super important is written down on paper or printed on a card that you have to get into with a locked box in order to make anything work. And then you got to have all the mechanical encryption technology before it'll even go. And there's multiple levels of mechanical encryption and mechanical securing of all this stuff to where if anyone even starts to mess with it, it shuts it all down. It will not go. So that's one important component we fail to realize is that just because it's newer technology or it's more smart doesn't make it smarter to use in every application.
Absolutely.
So again, in the Rex Reviews project, we always like to focus in on the application before we determine which equipment might be best. Same thing with rifle scopes, right? Mm-hmm. You got a rifle scope with old technology. The thing is going to be very robust, very heavy duty, very hard to break. It will be very reliable all the time. There are smart scopes with electronics going on, lasers that can detect stuff, and it prints all the stuff inside your scope and tells you what to do, and you hook it up to your phone. That stuff is neat, but for serious duty, that is not as robust as the old tech. So it's all about application.
And margin of error, too.
Absolutely. It's got to be done. Some things are too important to just throw out there everywhere. And that's the reason primarily why this stuff is old. Now, there are updates in terms of components and things like that. There is new technology that could be employed on that. But by and large, the old school style of the technology, when you're talking about the mechanical computer components, that stuff they would be very wise to almost kind of leave the same. And that's why they have not changed the design of that stuff to be more smart.
Well, it makes sense, especially in today's world where everything is connected and everything that is connected is potentially vulnerable.
Yeah. So basically, your scenario is like in the movie Terminator 3, where, what do you call it, Cyberdyne, or what's the heck's that program? Skynet, yeah. Skynet hacks the computers and it goes into there and it launches everything, right? Mm-hmm. In real life, the way it's set up now, that will not happen because they're not hooked into the internet. They're not hooked into the major grid that is accessible from outside. All that stuff is very secure on its own whole network. And they got guys with rifles in between here and there, so you ain't going to get to it. And if you do try to get to it, I mean, you got like a huge amount of guys ready to go on helicopters and Humvees to be there in less than 30 seconds to, like if remember those protesting nuns a few years back, Lou?
Protesting nuns?
Yeah, they didn't like nuclear weapons, so they're like grabbing on the fence on a missile silo and they're shaking the fence with signs like, That'll learn them. We're going to stop the nuke from launching by climbing this fence. A bunch of nuns were like trying to get into a nuclear silo.
And how'd that work out for them?
Yeah, well, the guy was there within like 35 seconds. There's like helicopters landing. I mean, that's something you don't ever want to try because they're not going to be nice to you when they put you in the folding chair in the dark room and ask you a few questions. You know what I mean?
Those places do exist then.
Oh, they absolutely exist. And when it comes to nukes, them security guys do not screw around. So good luck with that. After all these years since 1945 of the United States having nuclear weapons, none of them have been hacked yet. None of them have been haphazardly detonated. Now, there have been broken arrows where they've lost them. But if you ask me, Lou, I don't really think those were organic broken arrows. You don't lose track of nukes, like the ones they lost off them B-52s from, where was it, Minot Air Force Base, and they flew to Nebraska or someplace. Yeah, so some nukes were lost a couple years back, some ALCMs, I think, or some short-range attack missiles, SRAMs maybe, but they had nukes on them, and they lost track of them, supposedly. That's what hit the news anyways. And I don't know if they're running a drill or they're doing a test on to see how people would react to it or what the heck. They were up to something, in my opinion, because I do not see how it's even possible for them to lose track of nukes, knowing of all the levels of security involved with the transfer of them and signing off on them. It just doesn't happen. So if nukes are lost, they are lost on purpose. And that's actually more troubling than them getting lost on accident. If there's on accident, then, you know, you can at least maybe think that there was just a screw up or something. But when it's on purpose, what are they doing with nukes that they want off the books? I don't like a couple hundred of them floating around the earth where there's no paperwork on them. You know what I mean? They kind of went offline and they just disappeared. All that stuff, in my opinion, has got to be on purpose. But I don't know any details on that. That's my opinion when I hear about, or the ones that were stolen or lost or signed off illegally from Dyess Air Force Base like a year or two ago. They kind of disappeared. They came and picked them up and they took them someplace out east. They don't know where they went. That was not an accident. That was definitely on purpose. And apparently some kind of covert deal going down there. Nobody really knows, but maybe we'll find out one day when all the power turns off. And then you'll hear about it on your shortwave radio at the neighbor's house a month later after the cannibal hordes are gone.
Oh, you paint a lovely picture there, sir.
Yeah, you never know.
So we've got all these safeguards in place with this older technology for good reason, obviously. And so far it has worked. And you, Mr. Rex, are obviously well more versed than myself in this whole field. And coming to the table as a layman here, maybe on behalf of the rest of the folks that don't know as much as you, what exactly does it take to make a nuke in today's modern day and age? Like, why aren't people making these in their basement?
Well, it takes a city of scientists and a lot of money to make them. First of all, it's a relatively simple device in concept. Really, what you're doing is you're compressing super dense material where the atomic structure is arranged in such a way to where it's very close together. The atoms are in very close proximity to each other due to the metallurgy of the material being used. And in most cases, they use weapons-grade uranium or plutonium, which is made in a nuclear reactor, and it's just arranged molecularly in such a way to where you compress it under the right conditions, and you have atoms start to hit each other and split and fly apart, and then it releases the atomic energy. So basically, you have to compress two subcritical masses of fissile material together. And what that basically means is you have that super dense material. And radioactive materials have another effect too, is that they're continuously degrading and sending little particles flying off. And when you get them close enough together, those particles start to fly off and actually hit other particles, and that's what snaps it all apart. And all the rubber bands being held together in little balls at such high tension start coming undone. It's just a mess. And then it goes what they call critical mass, which means that it just flies apart and you got a nuclear reaction of some kind. And if it's done in an efficient, violent way, it's an actual fission event, which is like full yield fission, where it's mostly being burned up in an explosion. So that's basically how they do it. And in the first generation of atomic weapons, and that's something we should discuss too a little bit if we're going to do our nuclear weapons review here, is there's a difference between atomic bombs and nuclear bombs. And I hear this being misquoted all the time by various people who are even experts on it. And there are differences between those two things. An atomic bomb is very similar to our first generation. That just simply uses fission, the splitting of the nuclei of the atoms. Okay, that's just splitting it. Fusion is where they do the opposite. They actually fuse things together to create a fusion reaction. And so there's two different things going on there. So if you look at the first generation of atomic weapons design, which you could generally call it nuclear weapons, and most people would agree that that's kind of true because it's, atomic, nuclear, synonymous terms nowadays. But mechanically speaking, it's a different process. So like the Hiroshima bomb that was dropped on Japan over Hiroshima. Hiroshima, however you want to pronounce it. I don't know how do they say it?
It depends on where you're from.
Yeah, so the fission device that was dropped over Hiroshima was an atomic bomb. It was not a thermonuclear bomb. It was just an atomic bomb. That means it was only using fission. And one of the most reliable designs that they wanted to use first to make sure they got the point across, they wanted guaranteed detonation. So they wanted to go with a very reliable design. And this is something that a guy maybe could make in his basement if he had the proper materials. But that's the hard part, as we'll get into in a minute. But it was a gun bomb design. They have two pieces of fissile material, right? Your uranium, your plutonium, and they smash them together using explosives. And in this design, they had a gun barrel, and they shot a bullet of subfissile material into a target of subfissile material that when they smash together, there's enough of that material in one place to where it pretty much guarantees that a fission reaction is going to happen. And so that was what was dropped on Hiroshima. Problem is, it's not a very efficient design. A lot of the energy is not utilized, but it is very reliable because it's very easy to make that happen. You just smash them together. I think they use gunpowder or TNT in that design. I forget exactly what they use to blast them together. There's different ways you can build it. But they use conventional explosives to just smash these two pieces together. And there's other things going on that they did there to enhance the odds and the efficiency of the bomb as far as bombardment of neutrons and whatnot inside the device at the same time to kind of give it a boost. And so that's what they dropped on Hiroshima. After they made the point on the first bomb, they wanted to do a more experimental test of the second really iteration of this fission weapon. It was still a fission bomb, but it was the implosion device. And that was what they basically dropped on Nagasaki. So that was utilizing a sphere-shaped piece of fissile material that was compressed using explosive lenses. So it was just a ball of your fissile material, and it was a pretty small ball, and we can get into that a little later maybe. But then they had high and low explosive lenses that were shaped charges perfectly oriented in 360 degrees in a sphere shape all the way around that sucker. And when all those explosives detonate, it compresses it. It does like an implosion device. And when that stuff squishes down into a small enough area, those fissile elements would then smash together enough to, boom, they'd go off. And that's a lot more effective device, pound for pound, for the amount of fuel you put into it. And it was a bigger bomb. Nagasaki was like, I think, 21 kilotons. And that's how they rate nuclear weapons, is by tonnage. And that's another thing people will not pay attention to very closely sometimes as they talk about megatons and kilotons. They switch them around. A 1 kiloton is 1,000 tons in terms of rating nuclear weapons energy. That's 1,000 tons of exploding TNT. So like 1 ton of TNT is really going to mess up a neighborhood, right? That's a pretty good chunk. So 1,000 tons of TNT is a lot. So 1 kiloton bomb sounds like a small bomb in terms of atomic bombs, but it's actually quite a lot of explosive stuff going on there. So a 1 kiloton bomb is nothing to shake a stick at.
And then a megaton.
A megaton is 1,000,000 tons. 1,000 kilotons for 1 megaton.
Boy, that whole the metric system.
Yeah.
Move the decimal point.
And when you're talking megatons, they have to come up with the term to rate how many people would kill with them. So they come up with the term mega deaths. And that's how they would rate casualties in a nuclear wars, by millions of people killed.
Yikes.
Yeah, so they'd say, okay, this has a casualty expectation rate of, 3 mega deaths or whatever you dropped it on this area of town. And so that's in the Cold War, that's what they used to categorize the effectiveness of their weapons' potential war power. You know what I mean?
That's some dark stuff there.
Yeah. One of the limitations of atomic bombs, and the reason they went over to nuclear bombs later, the thermonuclear design, is you're limited in how much fissile material you can put in one spot. Because that stuff is so volatile, you got enough stray particles flying around that they're just going to start to melt down. And you don't want to cause a unintended nuclear meltdown or a detonation, potentially a sloppy detonation, kind of like a dirty bomb is just a very poorly constructed atomic bomb that just, you got fissile material just being blown up with conventional explosives. It'll probably sort of melt down. It might make a huge ecological disaster. It's not going to have your full yield explosion. It's just going to be like a Chernobyl type event or a Fukushima type deal for a dirty bomb. So a dirty bomb is just a bomb made by someone who didn't put it together all that well. And that's pretty much anyone who's going to make it with anything less than an entire city of scientists over a course of a few years is not going to pull it off very effectively. But the way to get around that yield restriction when you're talking atomic weapons is you can only have a small yield, like a range of maybe on the order of under 50 kilotons, and there's dependent on design and how they put everything together and the exact materials being used. It's limited because once you get too much, you create a critical mass. That critical mass means it's critical. It's going to go poof. It's going to start doing stuff. And you don't want that to happen until you're ready. So they created the Teller-Ulam design, which was a thermonuclear weapon. And what they used there is that in order to create a fusion reaction, they used a small atomic bomb, the implosion device, right? Like the Nagasaki bomb, but a smaller one, to create enough heat and energy to initiate a fusion reaction in a different component of elements that was non-fissile material in a different section of the bomb. So it's a two-stage device. In a nuclear weapon, a true thermonuclear bomb, like the currently deployed bombs and warheads that they use right now are, you know, the Teller-Ulam design. And they have an atomic bomb as the trigger. That lights off, and you have a blast shield in between that and the secondary phase, which is usually a lithium deuterium isotopes that kind of add up to tritium when it's all fused together. And there's other things in hydrogen, you know. That's where you get your hydrogen bombs and stuff like that. Depending on, there's a lot of different ways to skin that cat if you get into terms of the chemistry of the nuclear stuff or whatever. Them nuclear chemistries, Lou, they're pretty fun. You get Pete Wiggleson in here. He'd explain it more fun than me.
Probably explain it on a level that I could understand.
Yeah. All right. Is Pete around here or what? Is Pete back in the studio, you think?
I haven't seen him for a while.
Oh, no. The shit, he's right over there, Lou.
Is he? Holy smokes, Pete.
Hey, boys, what's going on?
Mr. Wiggleson.
Hey. Am I allowed to come on the air here, Lou?
I guess so.
Yeah, we'll just let Pete have the mic here for a minute. I'm going to pull my chair away for a minute here.
Okay. Mr. Wiggleson, how are you today?
Why, howdy, Mr. Lou there. I'm doing pretty good out there. I was just trying to keep my ponies fed. It is awful cold out there in the Arctic Circle up here. And, I tried to help you guys with the operation hauling your microphones around with my pony cart. But, hello, Miss Casey Day. How you doing?
Well, hey, Pete, did you move up here? Or
No, I'm just part of,
visiting?
I help out Rex with his Rex Reviews podcast. And anytime Rex needs a more colloquial, is what Rex calls it. I don't really know what that means. But more of a backwoods kind of explanation on some of these nuclear things or some of these other things that are going on with these mechanicals, integrities and chemicals and biological systems and things that Rex likes to talk about, I come on here and I just kind of give it a plain English interpretation of whatever you guys is talking about. I'm that bridge to the more common folk in the United States so they can understand what old Pete Wiggleson's telling them about whatever complicated stuff this Rex over here tries talking about.
And that Rex is talking crazy stuff today. I'll be honest with you, Pete.
Well, yeah, he likes them nuclears, and I like them nuclears too. That's boys in the red, white, and blue. They wear the blue uniforms under them mountains with them nuclears, and that's the only reason them pesky Russians ain't trying to kill us yet. So I salute them boys down there in them missile holes and your nuclears, because old Pete Wiggle here, he totally agrees with your cause.
So, Pete, you agree with the nuclear cause? Are you,
Well, yeah,
worried about
it's
the
what Mr. Rex would call mutually assured destruction. If they try blowing us up with their nuclears, they can be dang sure that we'll blow them up with our nuclears. That way, nobody wants to start a shooting contest. It's like the old OK Corral when Doc Holliday come around the corner with his old street howitzer, his 12-gauge double barrel sawed off. He had that pointed at them boys down there, and he says, if you really want to start a gunfight, you're going to pay dearly with your lives. And so it might take the fight out of them a little bit when you have that big old double barrel pointed right at them. So that's the idea of the nuclears.
So, Pete, how do you feel about people saying our nuclears are out of date?
Well, I think what Mr. Rex there was trying to say is that this newfangled technology from all these millennial generations and stuff is just too high tech for them nuclears. And you don't want some kid in his basement playing his Nintendo 87 or his the Xbox situation accidentally launching a nuclear because it was accidentally hooked in his game. I did see a movie about that back in them 80s. In them 1980s there about some kid playing a game, thermonuclear war, and he accidentally almost launched all the nuclears. So really, if they use the old levers like Pete Wiggleson, the levers and the knobs, instead of all them electronic type systems, it's a lot more not going to happen with your Nintendo accidentally launching the nuclear. So that's kind of what Rex was trying to say.
That is the big danger with the whole new technology, is if you put the app, like you get the nuclear weapon app.
Pete Wiggleson here don't really know what app is, but I heard about them things. I think them also causes problems as well, and for things I don't know.
Pete, do you have a cell phone?
Cell phone. That's what them people in New York City got over there. I heard they got these cell phones. They don't even got no cords on them. And when they was talking to Wall Street people and they want to make some big deals like our glorious new leader, Donald Trump, and his yellow hairdo, he definitely does need to have, people who's connected with the big people, they got to have their cell phones so they can talk, with the Wall Streets and big skyscraper type people. But old Pete Wiggleson don't have no need for no cell phone.
Wiggleson just keeps it real, I think. And that's also the importance of safeguarding all that nuclear technology, is not hooking it up to the internet or cell phones.
Exactly. And I think that's all Mr. Rex is trying to say, is just, you don't want that hooked on your Nintendo system on accident. So they just didn't even hook it on there in the first place.
One of the things that Rex was alluding to and that we were going to get to here was the materials involved in this whole process. Can you break that down for us a little bit, Pete?
The materials of the nuclears. I remember talking with Mr. Rex about this here, and the problem is a lot of people think you can just throw one of these bad boys together in your old barn out there where you butchered a deer and whatnot, and that ain't just really going to happen, because the hard part about getting the materials is you got to find all the right kind of stuff. It's like making a fine Yukon grade whiskey. You can't just throw any old thing in there. It's got to be exactly right, or it's just going to be all wrong. It ain't going to do what it's supposed to do. It might even make you blind. So you got to make it all good. But basically, they got teams of scientists. I mean, if you consider the United States taking on the axis of evil during World War II, we had to have entire teams of the smartest and sharpest little math nerds they could find. And they put them all in a giant city, and they didn't let them talk to nobody. And all they could do is just build the nuclear. And it took them quite a while to pull it off. And entire countries, entire whole nations have tried to get these nuclears running, but they could never get the materials. It's just too hard to refine that stuff. They spin it in circles to get it all sifted out, kind of like you'd spin your seed, to on when you're farming in your tractor. You gotta sort things out using the spinning technology, the centrifuges. And there's other ways they can do it where they're running through pipes with different permeabilities, like them oil field folk would kind of do. But they do it with the nuclear materials so they can shift it out, because there's different grades of uraniums, and there's only certain Rex, what would you call that there? Allotropes. There's allotropes of different metals, and they squish together different based on the moleculars. The molecular structures don't work good unless you get them all perfect. So really making the materials what causes people not to make nukes in their basement, because you can't get nuclear material without cities of scientists and nerds that actually know what's going on. And so far, only a few first world countries is able to pull it off. And the rest of them just stole it from everyone else.
Because only those first world countries have enough nerds and enough manpower and enough time and money.
Yeah, time and money and infrastructure. Yeah, and other countries like Pakistan and India now have nukes too, but I kind of maybe think maybe some of them Chinese people helped them out a little bit. And you can never trust them Chinese over there.
Easy, Pete.
So, I don't know, you kids and your sensitivities, but I'll tell you what, them Chinese people, they've been helping people, even that little bowl cut haircut boy over there, that little twerp, what's his name, Kim Jong-un, that Kim Jong guy. I mean, I think he has some help from them Chinese people. I don't think he made it, because I looked at him, and I don't think he would have very much luck building a nuclear, honestly, if you look at him.
Not enough nerds.
Not enough nerds, and the nerds that he would have would be too scared, I think, to do anything very effectively, because they can't even really farm very good yet over there. And if you got to farm really good before you start building nuclears. I mean, it's just you can't put the carriage in front of the horse.
Or the nuclear warhead in front of the horse, for that matter.
Yeah, well, they might have pony-delivered systems, but I'm not aware of it yet.
Speaking of ponies, how is your horse team holding up in this cold up here?
Well, old Venus, he's doing pretty good out there, but he's getting a little old, and he's doing okay. But if you just keep them fed pretty well, they put up with the cold pretty good.
That's the thing about old technology, is that it's reliable. You don't have to have a horse app for your cell phone to make it go or to feed it.
That's exactly right. I'll tell you what, some of these newfangled ranching people, they got them four-wheelers out there, and they just don't understand. They think old Pete's a little old-fashioned, but I'll tell you what, my pony will always start. All you do is you just wake him up a little bit, and then you get him hooked on their carriage, and he just goes.
Maybe you can explain this a little better for the rest of us, Mr. Pete. The Teller Ulam device that Rex talked about?
Yeah, that's that nuclear bomb there. That's different. To make a long story short, you just get a little atomic bomb that's squishing them atomic elements so squishy with the explosives that they explode in a fission reaction. The atoms split like old Einstein talked about in his E equaled MC squared situation. And so when that E equaled MC squared situation happens and all that stuff flies apart, it's so hot and so pissed, and all that other stuff that ain't nuclear but could have been turns nuclear. And that's that secondary phase, and that's just stuff that wants to fuse together. So they got chemicals in there that when they get hot enough, they fuse together. There's them bonds between them chemicals. And so when they fuse together, you can have unlimited amount of nuclear fuel in your two-stage nuclear bomb, because you can pile up that secondary phase as large as you want. And there ain't no problem with no subcritical masses turning into critical masses, because there ain't even fissile material. It's just making old-fashioned hydrogen and things like of that sort. Yeah, it works a lot more efficiently. You can get a lot bigger nuclear bomb from making it that way.
So, Pete, just to get your opinion on this, if there was a nuclear situation, what would be the thing to do? What would you do? Say you had an hour.
1 hour from a nuclear situation, huh? Well, I suppose I would try to not be where the nuclear would land. That's the number one thing. But old Pete, he's out here in the bush. He's not up in the missile fields up there where they got him up there. They got the MX missiles back in my day. But they defused them now, and they got the Minuteman still up there up north. But, if you're not right by the nuclear and you're old Pete Wiggleson, it's not really that big of a deal. Well, Pete Wiggleson's pretty old tech. I got my whale with my hand pump. I don't need to worry about electricities. I don't got internets. I probably wouldn't even know the war happened till the zombie hordes and cannibals came by. And I'd have to probably take them out with the old trusty Winchester. But after I interrogated some of those cannibals, maybe they would tell me there was a nuclear war. But, us people who live more simple like, we probably wouldn't even know it happened. Maybe them folks in them cities with their newfangled technologies and intricate societies and all this might fail, but there's advantages of living old school, I think, and my pony probably wouldn't care, and maybe there'd be a little radiation, but if you got yourself an old school diet, you'll be all right. Who knows? You might get kicked in the face by a horse, and that's the way you go. Them radiations ain't nothing worse than what you see on the ranch every day.
True story. And maybe we shouldn't spend so much time worrying about all these things that are out of our control. They're all just kind of boogeymen, if you will. And what the media and the news makes us believe is not quite what reality may actually be.
Indeed. Oh, old Venus is calling for me out there. I better get back outside. Where's Mr. Rex at?
I think he's here.
He's cracking into that, what do you call that stuff? That Belgian ale, it looks like. All right.
Uh-oh.
Oh, boy. Rex!
Mr. Pete Wiggleson, thank you for dropping by, sir. We keep him on staff not only to help us move all the equipment and travel around the world, but also to break more complex issues down into layman's terms. And he always does an amazing job.
Yeah, I like that guy, Craftsmap. He's pretty fun. Old Pete Wiggleson. Yeah, he's been around for a long time, but I hope he did help explain a little bit about, did he sort of explain the device in a little better colloquial English for us there, Lou?
It made sense the second time around coming from him. He put it all together pretty nicely.
But that's the currently employed technology now, is the two-stage nuclear devices. Pretty much that's what we all use. So those are true nuclear bombs. They use an atomic trigger to light off your secondary stage, which is non-fissile material, but it fuses those elements together. That's why they say hydrogen bomb, because the sum result of all the stuff fusing is hydrogen. So they use different isotopes of different elements that when they're heated up to like 10 million degrees, all those atomic bonds are loosened enough to where they can fuse together. So it's the same energy that supposedly fuels the sun. And that's my sun rant. Remember that one, Lou?
You've got so many rants, I can't keep track of them all.
Yeah, we'll get into that one some other episode, but ask me about the nuclear fusion in the sun and the neutrinos and all that fun stuff sometime.
Ooh, neutrinos, my favorite.
Yeah, you remember that one, right?
Yeah, it was my favorite breakfast cereal growing up. Neutrinos.
Well, supposedly they're all over the place, so maybe you ate one.
Good chance.
Yeah, right.
So with all this talk, it's kind of a spooky subject, and you talk about nuclears enough, and pretty soon you find yourself worrying about them, like who's got them, and are we in danger? Do we need to worry about them? What about, dare we say, like a terrorist group? What are the odds of some radical group of whoever putting something like this together and employing it against the free world?
Oh, that's a good question. And I don't pretend to know everything about the subject, but I do know a little bit about some of that, enough to say that there's no way you have to worry about a terrorist group ever putting together its own nuke. That's not going to happen. Like Pete kind of explained earlier, there is a huge amount of resources necessary to compile enough material. And even if you've got the right material, like let's say you were able to, for example, plutonium is one of the very commonly employed fissile materials they use for the primary stage of these nuclear bombs or even atomic bombs or whatever. And you're not going to be able to get that refined to the degree you need to have it to be effective in a weapon, right? You might have some radioactive stuff in a jar that's really toxic and nasty, and you might even have some stuff that could cause a problem. But to get to that level, even you could get universities on this thing, and they'd never figure it out. There's only a certain amount of very key people in the world who could actually probably assemble that, and those would be the actual engineers that work at the places that construct them. So just creating the material is going to be next to impossible. Plutonium has to be made in a nuclear reactor.
You just don't find that stuff like under rocks out in nature?
No, it's made in reactors. So first you have to be to the stage. That's why in the news you see people so grumpy at all these different countries trying to make reactors. And they always say, we need it for our power plants. That might be true, but that is also where you can make plutonium. It's a byproduct if you gear it that way to make it out of the other stuff, uranium and things like that. So, and then even uranium has to be refined. There's a very tiny amount of naturally occurring uranium. Most of your naturally occurring uranium is in the 238 range, right? And the stuff you need for your weapons grade uranium, which is going to give you the right molecular structure when all put together, is going to be uranium 235. And so if you look at it, there's like, even with plutonium, even if you could make the material, you have to get it refined properly to where when it becomes a solid metal, that is the exact right allotrope. Because you might have the right element, but the molecules have to be arranged in a certain way so that when you machine it, it's machined properly, so that when you compress it, it's going to operate properly. So you don't just throw the stuff together. You can have a giant chunk of uranium. You have to make it the exact perfect size, the exact perfect shape. They're complicated devices. They usually have a tritium pill in the middle of them to increase their efficiency. There's a lot of little details that go into making these things actually work. You're not going to throw it together in a basement. It's just not happening, especially for people that can't take a piss without wet in the front of their pants, which is your Alua fudge bars. They're not going to make one, okay? So even if they have the material, even if you handed them the chunk of material, then they would have to figure out a way to, in a perfectly symmetrical way, design explosive lenses that mathematically are going to perfectly efficiently compress that into a critical mass. So you have to create a spherical explosive lenses around a 360-degree shape that are exactly within very small tolerances. Those tolerances are very classified. And there's only certain lenses of explosives that will work to do that compression. So you have to have an entire guy who's dedicated his life, a team of scientists to put that whole part of the thing together. Then you got to have another guy that can get the right proper dose of neutrons into it. And there's neutron accelerators, and there's ways they bombard it with particles at the time of detonation to enhance the reliability and efficiency of the weapon to make it actually go full critical mass. You know what I'm saying? So you're just not going to throw it together in your basement. It's way, way, way more difficult than building a go-kart in your garage.
Very high levels of sophistication and just decades of research. And here's where my mind takes me, folks, just for a little tangent's sake here. You said we've had nuclear weapons since 1945, right?
Yep, that's when we first dropped them, and yep.
It obviously took quite a while to create those, and
we actually pulled it off very quick, but that was a war effort. But to be honest, that technology was envisioned like in the late 1800s.
Oh, really?
So they had been the physicists had been into this for a long time before that. So a lot of the groundwork was set up. But even knowing it, the war effort in the 40s, they threw it together in a very short amount of time. But that's like unprecedented. And it really does show that like, okay, a first world country with the help of some of the top people in the world, some of the German scientists that we had gotten from right before the war helped us out with that. But
So we've spent decades, generations trying to work on and understand and develop and perfect this technology when, like, I like a microwave oven to heat up my leftovers, and I think a nuclear reactor, if it doesn't blow up and melt down for power, is cool. But why? Here's my question, man. Why do we have to make nuclear weapons? Why do we even have to have this technology? If we had spent all the time, the money, the manpower, everything that we've ever put into trying to develop these machines to kill each other, instead if we had made like
starships to explore the solar system,
or even just like greenhouses for self-sufficiency, or like infrastructure for all the people on the world, instead of trying to kill each other, if we could bring each other up instead of doing the opposite, think of how far we would be.
Yeah, that's a shame that we don't embrace the ideals, though, isn't it?
Call me an idealist.
Well, it's true. That is true that would be better. The unfortunate reality of the world is once you let Pandora out of the box, you get all these crazy ghost guys flying around trying to kill everybody.
Right.
Then you have to deal with that whole world.
Yes.
And you better have your Pandora power to counteract it.
So that's that mutually assured destruction, right?
Absolutely. And that's one of the problems. Like, once you build something, you can't uninvent it, really. Unless you have absolute calamity, which completely erases all technology. Like, if we were to have a full-blown nuclear war and it sent us into the caveman phase for a few hundred years, maybe they'd forget how to make them. But still, there's so much stuff drawn up, and they'd rediscover this technology anyways. So it's just like with the Second Amendment firearms. Good people need to have superior firepower so that bad people don't use it against you, see? Or people with other agendas or whatever. That's if everyone's equally armed, it kind of deters the situation from happening. Now, the problem is, Lou, and I agree with you on this, is I think that even though it's really prevented the full-blown hot war of World War III from happening since World War II, is because of, like, the first world countries are not going to get in a full serious fighting war. The United States and Russia did not want to fight. Why? Because they'd both be completely destroyed. They'd both lose. And so that has prevented World War III for the last 70-some years or whatever, right? Problem is, like we said before, once the technology is proliferated elsewhere, there are countries that do have stuff, and the problem is there are also a lot of things made. And if a country goes down like the Soviet Union had happened in the late 80s and early 90s, where you got like starving generals and like all these people like with no money can't get paid, and they want to get money because the whole civilization collapsed for a little while, and their money and their currency went out the window. They sold a lot of that stuff. So some of that stuff is actually gone. They don't know where it went. One thing to consider is that anyone who could afford to buy one probably would save it for an extra special occasion. So they're not just going to light them off haphazardly, but they could light it off hazardly, like intentionally in a really bad place. So there are a lot of nukes laying around that aren't really accounted for. I think it would be very difficult to sneak one into the United States without us knowing, because we have an incredible layer of space observational technology that can really see them. Like, I can't really say what it is, and it's all classified, and I don't even know about it, but there are certain things that are like really up there, eyeballs looking at us, and they can see like radiation if you try to even sneak it in on a submarine. I mean, that's one of the ways they track submarines under the water with satellites, is they can see the trail of charged particles and stuff from like where the reactor had gone through in the presence. You know what I mean? I mean, you can see radiation with a certain technology. It does leave evidence. I mean, the best way to effectively deploy one would be to launch it on a rocket or a missile. If one would just light off one day as a surprise, it'd either be a huge breach in our security apparatus, or it would have been something more covert going on that like we would allow to happen. So I don't see a nuke just going off on accident or by a terrorist organization inside the United States without us allowing it to happen, because I don't see how they could pull it off given the incredible layers of security we have. It's always possible, I suppose. There's probably creative ways that they can get around all that stuff. But we have a very good security apparatus, to tell the truth, as far as importing like weapons grade action. Like, you can't just drive into like Washington, D.C. with a nuke in your trunk. They will know. They will definitely know. They've got surveillance aircraft that will see that. There's multiple layers of security when it comes to that. There are some things that they could do. One of the big threats would be is if they could get a nuclear weapon high enough in the air and just detonate it within line of sight of the United States, like high enough, you could create an EMP event that would take out all our power and destroy all our electronics. And you wouldn't even need to blow anything up, and you would destroy the United States just from one nuclear bomb going off up high in the sky. They could do that from the Gulf of Mexico. They could, because we're monitoring very closely our shores and things like that, but you could get a frigate out there with even a crappy rocket. So like one of these dictatorship type countries like North Korea, potentially, if he did go nuts, they could launch one off a yacht or something. And before it would ever get inspected, it doesn't even have to have any accuracy. If they can get it up 500 miles in the air and light it off, even a moderately equipped warhead with a decent amount of kilotons, like it would create enough electromagnetic pulse to take out all our electronics.
And everybody would wish they were living like Pete Wiggleson at that point.
Oh, yeah. And that's the thing is, like, if you go to third world countries where people just farm and don't even play this whole game of technology, they probably wouldn't actually know that happened until, they would know about it. It would destroy the world economy and it would disrupt all the food supply. But the people who are truly autonomous out in the bush, like rice farmers on the terrace rice paddies up in the Himalayas, they ain't even going to know anything happened for weeks. And they might hear about it. Oh, what the heck? Oh, the whole world blew up, huh? Oh, that's weird. Well, how's your corn doing? Oh, good. It's a good batch this year. And they might get some radiation later, but that's, it's going to be a disadvantage as our reliance on technology.
Mm-hmm. And it's just crazy, this level of technology that we're discussing and the war machine, if you will, the industrial war complex.
Yeah.
What if we could turn it into the industrial peace complex? Like take all these nukes and...
The only way I think that's going to happen, Lou, is when they burn them all up.
Yeah?
That will convince people that peace was a better idea. It's only going to be in the aftermath of a full-blown thermonuclear war to where people will get the idea that peace is a good idea. So that's why I think some of them crazy people want to have a nuclear war, because they're trying to make the point of that, but it gets into a whole nother nightmare scenario. But we'll see what happens, man. I'll tell you what, here's my prediction. With the technology being invented and deployed as huge as it is, and with the current tensions, and with considering the history of how stupid people are, we will eventually fight a nuclear power, and we will eventually actually have a nuclear war. And so this is a reality, I think. I think there's no way. You can't uninvent it. The second the United States and Russia and England and France and all your first world countries disarm, your other guys are going to get hold of that technology, and then they will use it on you because they think they might actually win, and they probably would. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like you say, it's Pandora's box, and once you invent it, you can't uninvent it.
Like the Ozzy Osbourne song says, thank God for the bomb. Remember that one? From the Ultimate Sin album. It's a pretty rockin' song. But he says, war is just another game tailor-made for the insane, but make a threat of their annihilation, and no one wants to play. So if that's the only way to keep the peace, then thank God for the bomb. Thank God for the bomb. And he goes on and on. But he talks about the doomsday clock is ticking, man, and it's true. Because you can't, they're laying everywhere, they're ready to go. And there are certain scenarios geopolitically that I think are pretty much inevitable eventually that would cause really stupid people in charge to launch them damn things.
All I can say is I'm glad it's not hooked up to the internet and nobody can download the app. And
as long as the mature people are kind of in control of the country, we won't launch them. But when these insane people finally get control, they'll launch them.
How close do you think we are to the crazy people being in control?
Well, oh boy.
Or is that too real of a question?
That's too real of a question. They already have been in control. They're just waiting for the right timing, I think, to have it. Because it's really, it's an inevitable fight. It's going to happen at one point or another. It's just the laws. You got the two biggest kids on the block. Sooner or later, they're going to fight. It's just going to happen. So it's just a matter of timing to see, like, when would I win? When could I pull off my objective? And so Russia's really making a mad dash to generate their 5th and 6th generation fighter jets, a lot of their anti-ballistic missile technology, and even accurizing their nukes. One of their old standbys is the SS-18 missile, which is their big nuclear ICBM, ground launch missile. And it has MIRV, multiple independently targetable reentries. So each nuke is carrying a bunch of warheads, but they've got them to the point where they can maneuver and evade our anti-ballistic missile systems now. So they're really, really investing in having a nuclear war still. We haven't been. It almost makes me think that there's certain people that are trying to lower our posture and allowing them to catch up so that when it is, the scales are tipped enough that someone might try something. So it's almost like you don't want one side to be totally outweighed the other. You want it to be kind of balanced to a degree, but you don't want one side to get over-equipped either. It's just so many dynamics on the timing of it.
It's a chess game.
Yeah, it's like the worst chess game ever. But yeah, I mean, oh boy, it could be a bad deal. And there could be an escalation. I suspect the trigger point would probably be a religious war in the Middle East because everyone wants a chunk of that place. You know, we want control over the Holy Land. All the rest of the countries over there want control over the Holy Land. Russia wants control over their areas, and we've already been in proxy wars for a few years with the Russians in the Middle East and in Ukraine. So we're already fighting. It's just it hasn't gone nuclear yet. So at what point would it escalate? There's infinite scenarios that could occur, but I think it's probably inevitable. I mean, it could happen tomorrow. It actually could. It really could with the geopolitical system we're in right now, especially right at the moment. I mean, it could happen very fast, or it could happen 25 years from now or 100 years from now, depending on how smart we want to be. But that's the problem. It depends on how itchy of a trigger finger. And I'm really glad there was mature people in the past like Kennedy and some of these guys who had ample opportunity to just hit the button, and they didn't. And even on the Russian side, I really appreciate them on their side, too, not hitting the button so far yet, too, right? Because, like, there's lots of excuses for us to launch nukes at each other, and we never did it yet.
And that's commendable, just on a humanity standpoint, I guess.
Yeah, and that's one of the problems, like, having good military leaders is important for your country as a deterrent. But I think that sometimes when you talk about the military-industrial complex and the war machine, people come out of that machine when they're being built, like the generals. A lot of times, like Curtis LeMay, I don't know if you remember him, he wanted to just carpet bomb and nuke during the Vietnam War. He's an all preemptive strike guy. And it's like they're thinking their whole life goal is different than what other people. So civilian leadership of the military is an important aspect. You do want those really awesome military guys to be at your disposal so that if there is a war, you'd win it. But a lot of these guys, I don't know how restrained they would be because they're looking at their win from a position of safety underneath a mountain someplace. And their whole life has been about winning wars. You know what I mean? So it's just interesting. It'll be, you got to have the right recipe of leadership. I think we're in an okay spot now, I hope, but I don't know, man. Like, it's hard to say how people would react. And there's lots of ways that geopolitical entities can manipulate things, too, and create false deals. Like in the movie, it was a really good movie by Tom Clancy, Sum of All Fears. Actually, it was a crappy movie, but it was an interesting idea of this Nazi group, right? This little tiny fringe Nazi group gets a hold of an old American nuke that was lost during the 6-Day War or something, or the Yom Kippur War in Israel, like a broken arrow, and they rebuild it, and they blow it up in an American city to blame it on the Russians to get the United States and Russia to have a nuclear war, because then the Nazis will win, see? Because after the United States blows up Russia and Russia blows up the United States, then their little fascism deal can have a deal. So there are third parties like that who would benefit huge from having the world blow itself up, because then they would be all equipped ahead of time to take over, see? And so there are those third-party entities. That's why it's not good to have all these little guys with nukes. You just want the big guys to have them. But then again, there are little guys within the apparatuses of the big guys that have control of them too, see? So like you have a whole covert subversive society underneath what we think is our leadership. And a lot of those people are like psychotic and crazy. And they would maybe have an excuse to start a nuclear war, because then their cult, whatever they're doing underneath the radar there, would maybe have a chance to go. So there's a lot of different things that could happen.
Yeah, it's just spooky stuff, man. You talk about it long enough and it kind of freaks you out, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, it'd be quite the experience. It'd be quite the show, wouldn't it?
Ah, the show of a lifetime.
I think so. Yep.
Casey Day, how do you feel about the whole thing?
It's a lot of bombs. It's a lot of bad stuff. That's a lot of not necessary bad stuff. That's a lot of, I mean, I believe in the carrying a big stick. I do. And walk silently, carry a big stick. I do. But why do we have to wave it around? You know, why do we have to, you know, they say that everybody has rights, and your rights end when you inflict or take away from somebody else's rights. And so in my view, in the way that I look at it, is waving weapons in each other's faces is a form of terrorism. And I just think that it's almost an unnecessary cruelty that nobody has to endure, but we force it upon each other because we'd rather, I don't know, rather show each other that we're the bigger, badder, whatever, than just accept each other as human and live a good life, But that's the way of the world. We always take the tough route. So
That's an interesting
That's all I
point you
got.
bring up, too. That's a very good point. And I think that the reality of it is actually even judgment can be a good thing in some ways because it just is the consequences of reality. You don't ever want to go against the consequences of what reality is because it encourages you to continue that kind of stupid behavior pattern, right? Like a kid that continuously is bad and just screaming and throwing fits and wrecking stuff never gets spanked, right? Well, it's not doing him any good never to have the consequences of his reality catch up with him, especially when he's a kid. And the problem with us, I think, in this situation is that we've been throwing fits all over the world too many times. And I think that eventually we will get spanked by the consequences of our own actions. And I think that we will eventually learn the lesson. It'll be probably the most hard lesson we ever had to learn when that does happen, because it's going to be like reminding us of the reality that we're just creatures on a planet that really don't need that whole thing to happen, that would be way better off just gardening and playing music.
Damn right.
And eating chocolate and skiing and all that good stuff that them Switzerland people figured out. I mean, why can't we be more like that, But I think that the only way to learn how to do that is to have the spanking, if you will. The great thermal spanking. And so I think in the aftermath, it'll be tough, but any lesson that is worth anything is really tough to have. And I'm pretty sure it'll happen, but I don't think it all has to add up to be a bad thing in the end. I think that it will certainly set straight the whole idea that that's the way to operate. And maybe we'll have 1,000 years of peace or something like that as an outcome eventually. I think it'll be a rough road of learning.
But it is the consequences of our actions, and it's a product of where history has brought us.
Yeah, you don't just build 20,000 nukes, deploy them everywhere, wave them in each other's faces, and then have all these situations where you tease each other with them for 70 years straight and just get away with it and use them as leverage to like throw your weight around everywhere.
And then
And that's not just us, that's everybody who has stuff like that or any kind of military capacity. It's just not the way to operate,
Yeah, it's unnecessary, I think is the good word to describe
We
it
can
all.
pick a destructive path or we can pick a constructive path.
There you go.
So if we want to choose one, we have to, that's like what we're going to get into in the next one. We talk about the experiment that mankind has went on with sinning, right? Eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is like, it's terrible, but it's almost the experience needed to appreciate what comes later when you're finally cured of that sin. You know what I mean? Like, how could you ever appreciate how awesome a garden is until you see how terrible stuff can be? And then, you know what I mean? It's like the Garden of Eden. Apparently, they didn't maybe appreciate it like they should have. And so they went down the wrong path for the last huge, long amount of years. And we're talking figuratively here, maybe, but maybe literally. I don't know. We'll see about that in a minute. But I think that that's what ties into the whole lesson, which is life, like we talk about this a lot, life is a test, dude. I think it really is. And whatever put us here is testing us. And if we have to refine ourselves, heat and pressure does a lot of speeding up that process. And nothing creates heat and pressure like a Whiskey 76 nuclear reentry vehicle.
You are the man of metaphors over there, Rex.
Here's the cure to this whole discussion, because it's pretty gloomy and doomy with all these mushroom clouds in the background here. But if you think about it like this, man, we get so caught up in the physical realm of everyday life and not being blown up by nuclear bombs and eating toast that we bought, from Walmart and all this stuff, that we forget about some of the greater things about like what makes us so special as humans. And I don't want to get preachy, but it's spiritual in nature. So much of it is just emotion, attitude, vision, contemplation, appreciation of music. Things like this all represent that whole realm of things. And I think that that's where the solution is just getting back in touch with our creator, whatever people want to say that is. And just the beautiful potential we have as humans. And that's the lesson to be learned here. And that's the escape from all this. And it's not really escaping the reality of it, because people who are bad are going to do what they're going to do. And if they take down society with them, I mean, think about how awesome, dude, I often think like all this modern stuff we've constructed to be convenient to us has been chains of slavery. We are slaves to the clock. We have to work for other people we don't want to. We have to be in a hurry all the time. We have to, dude, like you haven't seen no one relax until you've been to the third world. And it's farming season, and you're like, what is everyone doing on their roofs, sleeping, snoring, like at 3 PM, It's like Tuesday or whatever. Oh, they sleep, they're tired now. I'm like, what? just laying up there like some old grandma sitting there like eating a tomato. She rolls over and kind of like puts, and they wake up and have a cigarette and kind of walk around and, maybe go eat some food, eat some popcorn, pet the dog, go back on the roof, sleep in the sun for a while because it's a nice sunny day. Meanwhile, us crazy technology people over here created all this fancy infrastructure that we have to defend with nuclear weapons, right? We're the crazy people that have enslaved ourselves by that whole mindset. And so that's one heck of a way to erase that from the table, because it would put us back in the horse and buggy days. And it would be very tough in some ways, but it would be an incredible blessing psychologically for maybe our offspring that survived or whatever after the fallout's kind of calmed down. But really, I mean, it's a whole different world that, like, in a lot of ways is a lot more peaceful and a lot more warm, where people treasure the simple things in life. All the more crap we have to distract each other from each other is just getting in the way of the true beauty of life. And the more stuff we have and the more convenience we have and the more technology we have is the less time we spend with people. And people who have the simple lifestyle, the old school lifestyle, their whole life is about each other and their families and their friends and just community and living and enjoying that stuff. So I think that maybe that could be a blessing to have a thermonuclear exchange.
The eternal optimist over here. It's kind of like the old saying goes, though. It's worrying is like sitting in a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but it doesn't actually take you anywhere. And that's kind of what the whole discussion boils down to, is we can worry about these things that are out of our control, but if they happen, man, they're going to happen, and there's nothing we can do about it. So all we can do in the meantime is appreciate the present, enjoy the people that we're with, our loved ones, our family, our friends, and just make the most of it all, because, even if the nukes don't blow us up, our time here is still limited, folks.
Absolutely.
And we've only got so much time on this earth. So,
and maybe just by reflecting on our discussion today, we can learn to appreciate the moment better too. Because what we do have, and there are perks to the society we've created, is beautiful too in a different way. We're interesting critters, the stuff we come up with. Dude, and we don't know, we could get hit by a car in 5 minutes from now. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like old Pete Wiggleson might get in the face by his old pony and he might drop dead. So worrying about that kind of deal is kind of silly because it's inevitable for all of us anyways. So we just need to learn to appreciate what's right here at the moment, the blessings of the minute.
One of the things to keep in mind too is we could pay attention to the bombs and all the bad in the world. I mean, there's other things that are terrible in the world. There's people that are killing people for no reason. There's people that are killing people for reasons. There's people that, there's a ton of bad in the world. But when it boils down to it, people are human and we all have a responsibility and we all have certain rights, and we can take those rights and those responsibilities and make the best out of our lives, or we can worry about bombs.
Very true.
This started off as a review of some sort, didn't it?
Well, we just reviewed the seriousness of nuclear warfare.
And it's nothing to be taken to...
I certainly hope not.
Yeah.
Because it's one of them deals that people want to know what they're investing in before they hit the button to invest. So hopefully this will just raise the awareness a little bit on some of those things. And we didn't get into a lot of detail on what it would be like to be in a nuclear war, the effects of and all that. But we can get into that in another depressing podcast upload.
I'm good on all that, man. Let's talk about some happy stuff. How about that?
All right. Yeah. What we got up next, Lou?
I think it's time for a quick break, and we will be back with the latest installment of Rex's Bible Study.
We're getting into the real stuff.
It's all been building up to this, ladies and gentlemen, and we appreciate you putting up with the doom and gloom and nuclear review here today, but it's all about education and making us more aware. And if you take a moment to get a little depressed about all that bad crap out there, it makes right now seem pretty damn good, doesn't it?
Amen.
Thank you for joining us, folks. We're going to take a quick break and be back with more of the Rex Reviews podcast.